Well, great. That was awesome. I'm with you, Mike. I'm ready for kickoff now. I'll do a quick intro. Hi, my name is Jordan Hyman. I am the president for the board of directors for the Daily Collegian Alumni Interest Group. Really thrilled to be here. Thrilled to kick this off, and really thrilled to get everyone's feedback on today's panel, which we're really excited about. I just wanted to start a couple pieces of homework on our end. To say thanks, first of all, to Shar and to Melanie and everyone with the Alumni Association for letting us be part of today's and this week's festivities. We're super excited about it. I wanted to thank our panelists in advance. I won't spoil anything on the bios, but wanted to thank everyone for participating. I think everyone's in for a treat today in terms of our just wide diversity of perspectives and recollections as all things collegian and Penn State go. I wanted to thank our moderator, Jade Campos, who's the current editor-in-chief at the Daily Collegian, for leading today's discussion. And just a quick note, for anyone interested in supporting us with the Alumni Association and the AIG for the Daily Collegian, you're more than welcome to email us. Our email is collegianaig@gmail.com, or check us out on LinkedIn, on Twitter, Facebook, or at our website, which is psucollegianalumni.com. We're always looking for new ideas for speakers for the different events we do for students and alumni, for mentors, and also just for other creative ideas on ways that we can add value to the current generation of collegian staffers. So thanks again for your interest. I'm going to hand over to Jade to kick off the discussion and introduce today's panelists, and enjoy. Take it away, Jade.
Cool. Thanks, Jordan. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. Like Jordan said, my name is Jade Campos. I am the current editor-in-chief of the Daily Collegian. I'm a senior majoring in print digital journalism, and today we have 5 former editors-in-chief joining us for the discussion. So let me go on and introduce them. So our first panelist is David Jones, who was the Collegian editor-in-chief from 1953 to 1954. He was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal for 6 years in New York and Pittsburgh, for the New York Times in Detroit and Washington for 6 years, and a New York Times editor for 28 years, 15 as national editor and 10 as editor of national editions, which included 8 as assistant managing editor. And additionally, Dave was a member of the Penn State Board of Trustees for 15 years. So Dave, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jade. It's fun to be here.
Our next panelist is Jerry Schwartz. Jerry was the editor-in-chief in 1974 to 1975. He joined staff in a time of some turmoil when there was no candidate school, which is really bizarre to think about now as an editor-in-chief. He says when he walked in, he was given the choice of covering Greek life or cops, so he chose the latter. And he claims to have one of the world's shortest resumes. He worked at the Associated Press in New York as a reporter and editor since graduation, and now is an editor at large. Jerry, thanks so much for joining us. Our next panelist is Mike Abrams. Mike is the Director of Journalism Practices and Principles for the New York Times, where he has worked as an editor since 2004. He was the editor-in-chief of the Daily Collegian in 1993 to 94. He got a start as a reporter in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, and went on to work for other newspapers in Pennsylvania and Virginia before joining the Times. And he lives in New Jersey now with his wife, Rebecca, who's also a Collegian alum, 2 teenagers, and a dog named Ella. Thanks so much for being here, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
And our next panelist is Elena Rose, who is a graduate from the class of 2020. She earned her degree in print digital journalism with minors in women's, gender, and sexuality studies and global and international studies. Before serving as a Daily Collegian's 2019-2020 editor-in-chief, Elena fulfilled various editing and reporting positions at the student-run outlet, discovering her strongest passions within features reporting and social media editing. And Elena now works as a junior account executive at Lip Taylor, a New York City-based public relations and digital marketing agency focused on women in health and wellness. Thank you so much, Elena, for coming.
for having me. I haven't been gone that long, but I'm happy to be back.
Of course. And Maddie Aiken is our next panelist, who is the most recent editor-in-chief at the Collegian. So she was the 2020-2021 editor-in-chief of the Daily Collegian. And during her time at Penn State, she majored in digital and print digital journalism and minored in political science. Maddie, it's nice to see you again.
Thank you, Jade.
All right, so we're just going to get started with a simple question, open to anybody who's interested in answering. Just kind of talk about what was your time like at the Collegian in terms of office culture, any traditions that you guys might have had, any fun that you guys might have had. Dave, why don't you go ahead and answer first?
Well, I don't know that we had any traditions. We didn't have any parties. We were very serious journalists. So I'm going to pass this on to a more party-oriented element because I can't think of any particular traditions we have. My wife is looking in here. She was a Collegian editor also, and we haven't discussed this, but I don't know if she can remember anything, but I'll just pass it on to another editor.
I'll take it from there. I can't say I was a party animal. In fact, I was the only teetotaler on the staff, I think, which as a result, I'm the one who remembers what happened at the parties. We were take a step back from the party stuff. We were more of a cult than a newspaper in a lot of ways. We had people who spent 60 hours a week in the office, and then they hung out together. The parties were a lot of fun. We were a scruffy and rambunctious group. Our parties usually ended around 3 a.m. with us all hanging on each other and singing Beatles songs. It was a good time.
It's amazing to see how the standards have deteriorated since my time here.
Only in those 20 years.
I think that we did that 60 hours in the office thing and then went out drinking together. Anybody who's on this call who was in my era knows I used to like to go to happy hour and then I was ready for a nap after that. One thing I remember also is there used to be a Pizza Hut up the block from the James office, and they had like a really cheap buffet for lunch, and we ate way too much of really bad pizza. So I remember that.
I can definitely say, I mean, a lot of your experiences match with ours as well. I guess things haven't really changed that much, but no, I mean, in many senses, the Collegian socially just kind of follows what a lot of the other clubs do. You know, we have a formal once a semester. People who are 21, there's a bar crawl at the end of the year, Halloween parties, things like that. As far as traditions go, I would definitely say Margarita's Pizza was a huge staple for people who were in the James building. And something that's kind of interesting about my time at the Collegian is I started in 2016 as a freshman, and we were still in the James building then, stayed all through my junior year, moved out the first semester of my senior year. And then we moved to Midtown Square. And Midtown Square is, oh gosh, I can't even, what is the street called now? I'm so removed, I don't remember. But it's a couple blocks by, it's right by the Borough Council building. It's like a block back from Beaver. So the food options close to us are a little different now. I think Margarita's Pizza has lost a little bit of its grip since we moved, but you know, there's Panera and all that by. So I don't know what Maddie and Jay think about that, but.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, obviously the past year, the traditions changed a bit at the Collegian because of COVID, but we definitely did like the 60+ hours in the office, but I think over the past year for a lot of us, it was a lot of just staying in the office because there weren't many places to go. But that was fun. We did get to do final press run this year. You know, we got to go out a bit. You know, people would go to like downtown places to eat or bars, but also it was a lot of like picking things up and bringing them back to the office. But we made it work. So I don't think the camaraderie aspect has died, but it definitely has changed a bit since COVID hit.
Did you guys get pewter mugs at the end of your tenure?
Yes.
No, we did not, but I've seen them. I think we always wondered what they were. We weren't super sure. They were just kind of around, but I'm glad you mentioned that because I don't think I would have known what that was.
In my teetotaler guys for my 21st birthday, they brought me a pewter mug filled with milk and cookies, which I had to chug in the office.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, I mean, just like Maddie said, like pretty much things have stayed, the traditions have stayed the same, just some things are changing, a lot of picking food up, and especially on print nights, everybody would kind of go out to one place and someone would get a mass order. But now we're in Willard now, so things are going to change again. I'm actually sitting in Willard right now. So we just moved in last week, so we'll see what kind of traditions we pick up along the way. And anybody who is in the audience, feel free to throw in questions in the chat throughout the event. We're going to be doing some questions at front, but probably the last 20 minutes or so, we're going to be doing audience questions. So feel free if you have anything that pops up. So our next question is, there's been a lot of changes in technology in the journalism industry throughout the past few decades, whether it's been with the Collegian's print product, social media, video content, anything like that, any way that, all of these guys have seen the Collegian grow in technology over the past, time of their tenure at the Collegian. So Dave, I know you were talking a little bit about.
No, we're not. That light has to be on.
I think I should probably start with that since I could lay the foundation. I don't know what a lot of those things you were talking about are, but I'm sure my successors will. We were in the Collegian. The Collegian was in the basement of Carnegie, and it was in a classroom that was used until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then the doors would open and the Collegian staff would file in, and we would put out the paper. There was a U-shaped copy desk, and there's some other desks there and so forth. And we had a very high-tech, state-of-the-art operation. Against 2 walls of the room were these little machines called typewriters. And we used to put paper in the typewriter, and then you'd hit the keys like you do with the computer screen, and the words would appear on the paper. And then you take the paper and you'd give it to editors who would take a thing called a pencil, and they would actually edit the copy with a pencil on paper. Can you imagine that? How advanced that was? And then when it came time, we were printed at the Center Daily Times, which was downtown. So when it came time to transmit the copy to the printer, we had candidates for staff as runners to run the copy down. That was the modern way that we ran the copy to the printer and transmitted the copy. And I can't knock that because that's where I met my wife, running copy to the CDT. And then when down there, they had these machines called linotype machines, which were these big machines that printed little slugs of type made out of lead. And then we would put them in the thing called a chaser. We'd form them all up and we'd put the paper out. So that was the nature of the high-tech operation we had. And the most dramatic achievement of technology in my time there was when WDFM began a student radio station, which had never been heard of before. And the Collegian did some of the news reports for WDFM. So that's the history of the 1950s technology scene.
Great, yeah. And Mike, you were about 30, 40 years later. So how much did that change during your tenure?
Well, it's probably hard for most of us on here to imagine life without email, but email came into being when I was in college. I remember complaining about the first assignment. We all complained about the first assignment we had to file by email, which is kind of ridiculous to think about now, but it was still very much a print system. And, we talked about whether we could redesign things, and we talked about graphics, and we talked about a lot of the things that journalists today talk about. I mean, we very much took it seriously, but it was once a day and you were done at the end of the day, even if it was a really long day. I think the big change in our careers really now is you can't take that audience for granted anymore. It doesn't just go on a dead tree, whether you like it or not. It goes out into the world, and people will ignore it unless you can find them, unless you can reach them with the right combination of words and technology, and it's really complicated. And so for some of those who followed us, I think it's become even more of a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And Matt, you were the most recent editor-in-chief. So how have all of those changes been implemented, especially with social media?
I think in the past few years, we've done a lot of building up our social media presence, but also our multimedia presence. So during my time, we had editors posting on social media and like consistently checking what we were doing on social media. And that was really the main focus, our social media content rather than the print content, because we would more just, think about the paper, like, maybe like the 2 days leading up to it. And then we were also very focused on building up our multimedia staff. So, we had videographers for a while, but now like they've added podcasters. They're really trying to build up the YouTube channel, which even though it doesn't really affect me anymore, I'll tell everybody to subscribe to the YouTube because we were always trying to get more subscribers. And then, we're trying to like, I guess, approach things in a different way and not just with words, but also with photos, videos, audio. That was definitely something that, we were trying to be very innovative. And I think as long as you're trying, then innovation will come about in some way.
Yeah, and with all of that, one of the big things that we're working on right now, moving into the next steps of social media is TikTok. So the Daily Collegian is actually on TikTok now. So if any of you guys are on TikTok, make sure you follow us. And so, over the past 2 years now, the pandemic has been one of the most defining news experiences for a lot of journalists around the world. So, talk about some of the biggest news that's shaped your career at the Collegian. I know, Jerry, you were mentioning that when you came into journalism at the Collegian, there was a lot of turmoil going on.
Yeah, we were kind of a Watergate class of baby boom journalists. We took ourselves very, very seriously, and also with a good deal of irreverence at the same time, which is kind of the 1970s in a nutshell. What was going on out there, the president and leaving, first the vice president, then the president leaving, ended up being mirrored in a weird thing going on in USG. There was an impeachment hearing that went on for some weeks involving the USG president. So we felt we were kind of following the lead of Woodward and Bernstein, although I don't recall us breaking anything, to be honest with you. We had the issues at the time locally were unionization, faculty unionization. It was a time of feminism and gay rights were coming to the fore in ways that they hadn't before. So it was, for a place, given that Penn State wasn't generally a really hotbed of radicalism or campus disruption or any of that stuff, there were a lot of things that we could cover and a lot of things that we got into, and so it was a very different time because of that. Although I suspect Penn State has gotten any more radical than it was then.
Definitely, yeah. And Elena, the pandemic really started in the midst of your tenure as editor-in-chief. So what was that like?
Yeah, it was pretty wild. I was thinking, sort of going into this panel, looking through operating reports that I had written for the board of directors while I was editor-in-chief, because I was like, I feel like all anybody cared about before the pandemic was football and basketball. And I was like, is that really true? And I went through and it was like, yeah, all of our top 10 stories were football and basketball all the time. So honestly, before the pandemic, there wasn't much crazy. Jacob Farriott too said, and wrestling, correct, Jacob Farriott. But no, it was kind of weird because before COVID, there wasn't a lot that really happened that was, super newsworthy, super buzzworthy throughout the year. And then we just kind of got like slammed with COVID March on. And I remember sitting in the office with Dave Eckert, who was the digital managing editor my year, and Tyler King, who was the managing editor. And Dave was like, what do we want to do about covering the coronavirus? It was so weird because what happened for us was it was really our spring break was that second week of March. And we hadn't been told yet by the university whether or not we were going to come back. There were other schools that were saying that people should wait 2 weeks at home after spring break. Other people were canceling their semesters totally. So it was really weird. We didn't know anybody who had it. It was nothing like that, but it was just kind of like, we don't really know what to do about it. Like, we feel like this is going to be huge, but this is so unprecedented. I hate to even use the word unprecedented. Everyone's heard enough of that word this year, but it was really weird. And then that was pretty much, we got into the coverage with it. And I mean, obviously we were trying to keep up with news coverage in general, sports coverage in general, but it was like sports were being canceled. It's not like there were events that were happening. And we were trying to not inundate readers with just information about COVID because obviously everyone gets tired of it. We also didn't want to worry people more than we needed to. You know, we didn't kind of want to like sensationalize things where we didn't need to sensationalize things. So it was kind of a difficult balance because we needed to write about what was important, but people weren't interested in that after a while. And we also, you know, didn't want to blow anything up. And it's tough to have that balance between being an editor and being a person where you're also freaked out about the pandemic. And, you know, you're trying to like keep yourself down to earth and not, you know, over dramatize anything. So it was a really interesting time to just kind of figure out what was sticking and what wasn't, and what did we need to do, because we'd never been in a situation like that before.
Definitely, yeah. And one of the big things that we found as journalists through the pandemic that was hard to deal with was, you know, Penn State being open about cases and just being transparent with journalists and students and the faculty about what was going on campus. So can you guys talk about what the relationship with the university and the Collegian was like during your time? I know, Maddie, you were nodding your head because we had to deal with transparency with Penn State and COVID. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I don't know how bad things were before all the Sandusky stuff happened, but from my understanding, the university became extremely tight-lipped after all of that. And it was just hard because it felt like it was very hard to get information from Penn State that they didn't want to share. And, you know, even if they were sharing information, they were putting their own positive spin on it, or maybe not like revealing all the facts because they wanted to preserve their image. And there isn't, at least the way that we felt in my 4 years at the Collegian, is that, I mean, there are ways to like go behind the university's back, and then you're going to get an angry email, but that's expected. But it also does feel like, to some extent, like there's definitely information out there that, you know, you're not going to get a statement from them, or they're not going to even like respond to your email sometimes. And, you know, because Penn State isn't a public university, you can't even file a right to know request. So I think, you know, throughout my years at the Collegian, we tried really hard. But I do think that Penn State just has, at least right now, it feels like they definitely are trying to stay on top of all the different media outlets in the community. And they're very much trying to, you know, keep like a certain image of themselves, and any sort of bad press from us, they would get angry by, and then, you know, sort of forget about the fact that we're like reporting on all aspects of the community, you know, not just trying to report on the negative things. But it definitely feels like Penn State is, you know, trying to prevent us from telling the full story.
Well,
in
Maddie,
the vibe I had.
I think you've had good experience, because as you grow older in journalism, you'll find this is not an uncommon problem with institutions of all kinds. I'm not justifying Penn State's attitude, certainly, but get used to it.
Yeah, definitely.
Not to sort of dump on a colleague on the panel here and a former Times colleague, but my lasting impression of the Board of Trustees was sitting there to cover it, and a vote is cast, and then there's the choreography of the press office handing out the releases immediately, and it's just the idea that it was a foregone conclusion. And so you just know you're kind of being spun, and it makes you really skeptical at the least, and probably jaded and cynical at the worst.
Well, now I think they actually released the decision the day before the vote, if I remember correctly, because I had to cover a Board of Trustees meeting once. So it's like,
We remember that audacious.
I would take a step back. When I was editor of the paper, the Board of Trustee meetings were closed entirely. And I'm not sure whether this is an improvement. I think it is to some degree. At least people are out there talking. But we spent all 4 years I was at Penn State. It was a go-to topic for the editorial page, railing about the closed Board of Trustee meetings.
Well, you know, I was on the Board of Trustees when Spander and Paterno were fired. And when I joined the board in 1997, I think it was widely viewed that people would have to be cautious with me because I would be leaking all over the place. So I had to be very careful about how I discharged my responsibilities as a trustee, so as to be credible with if I wanted to have any influence at all with other trustees, I had to be trusted by them. So it was an awkward position for me to be in. And when the Sandusky scandal broke, I really got put in the middle on that one.
Did you ever experience any transparency issues during your time at the Collegian, Dave?
We were probably too naive to recognize the transparency problems we had when I was a sophomore. Milton Eisenhower was a relatively new president, and he told the editor of the Collegian that he was not going to interfere with anything that the paper wanted to print, but he wasn't going to bail them out if they got into trouble for printing it. And that was, I think, my experience there was pretty true. Nobody, in my experience, ever from the university ever said we couldn't print something. They might do something to prevent us from getting information that would enable us to print, but we didn't get censorship. The biggest issue that blew up when I was editor was in my senior year, fourth year. Questions began to be raised by other students about the role of Lion's Paw, which was a secret organization of 15 men in a campus that had women, and what role it was playing and so forth. And there was some suggestion, and the Collegian wrote about this, and in fact, one of the women who I think is on this call was writing editorials about it. The question became one of whether the president was using Lion's Paw as a shadow government for the student body, and whether he was using them to cast their votes in the student government to meet the needs of the university. I can't say I can spell that out in detail, but that became a pretty big issue. And that was the biggest transparency issue we had, which was not resolved while I was there. It slopped into future years.
Yeah, Elena, I know you mentioned previously before our weekend started that you also experienced some kind of things going on with secret societies at Penn State during your time at the Collegian.
Yeah, I mean, was never involved with one or anything like that. I could say that secret if it were a secret, but no, I was not involved with one. But no, I mean, it was definitely a thing that people wanted to know about, that people wanted to report on. That was something that there's another outlet at Penn State called The Underground, and The Underground wrote a story trying to sort of look into the history of secret societies, if there was any other information to uncover. So, I mean, it's definitely something that people want to know about. And I think it's probably not what secret societies would want attention from. I don't think they would want people in the media to be reporting on it. But yeah, I mean, it's always something that I think people are kind of interested in knowing more about.
Oh, yeah.
Well, when I was editor in the 50s, it was standard practice for Lion's Paw to tap the Collegian editor. And one of the editors before me, when I was a freshman, rejected the tap, as did I when I was a senior or juniors for a senior year. But the intervening editors and subsequent editors, at least for some time, rejected the tap, accepted the tap, which I thought was a real conflict of interest for the Collegian. I don't know what the practice is now. I know the Lion's Paw's become a co-ed and accepts women, but how transparent it is, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and Elena was mentioning that, learning about Lion's Paw and other secret societies was something that a lot of students were really interested in. What were like the big topics of interest to students on campus during your times as editors-in-chief? Mike, was there anything that really stood out to you? You're muted.
Yep, sorry. We had to have at least one person be muted. Yeah, I remember we did some pretty aggressive coverage about the athletic program and whether there were particularly football players and I think men's basketball players getting extra benefits that other students weren't getting. For instance, the basketball team used to eat at the tavern and have a pretty nice spread. I know a lot of us at the Collegian would have liked that spread, but and then the women's basketball team actually showed more outrage about that than the university administration did. And it was a lot of scrambling on the coverage, particularly like the Nittany apartments or whatever they're called, where the football team lived, are nicer than a lot of the other on-campus housing was for the football team. And there was a lot of kind of dissembling at the time that I recall that the administration did to kind of close ranks and say, no, this is all very much in line with what other programs are doing. And it is. And we're seeing that arms race for what athletes are given has just accelerated to the point where they're really professional organizations. And there are a lot of ways to make what is being granted the athletes standard operating procedure.
Yeah. Jerry, was there anything that stood out to you during your time?
I would say the one issue that went over all 4 years was tuition. And it seems a little weird to think about that now, because when I started at Penn State, I believe the tuition was about something between $1,200 and $1,300 a year. But that changed. I mean, I think over the next 5 years, it increased about 180%. It was the beginning of the defunding of state education, which proceeds all to this day. And it was the one story that people had got their hooks into.
Yeah, definitely. And I know Elena was mentioning earlier about football being one of the biggest topics. Was there anything else during Elena or Maddie, your times, that really was prevailing?
When I went back and I sort of looked at what the top stories were of each month, I mean, like I said, was a ton of sports, but definitely people were interested in housing too, particularly the bigger housing complexes they're making now, these like high rises that just keep popping up. And it seems like we really don't need any more because they're not even being filled. So I think that's kind of a topic that people want to know more about all the time, as do I. So that's something as well. But no, I mean, really, it was like sports, housing, COVID. That was pretty much it. Like nothing else really ever cracked the top 10 for us typically.
Yeah.
I think for us, it was a lot of like COVID in the backdrop of everything. So, like the summer I started, there was a lot going on with race reform. So we really like jumped in the deep end in terms of coverage because there was a lot going on in State College. And obviously that was something that we wanted to be sensitive in our reporting about. And then lots of stuff with like COVID cases, because Penn State, they reported cases, but they didn't provide us with as much information as other schools were providing. And they were very reluctant to, say like, where cases are happening. If there are any clusters, they wouldn't give us any of that information. They wouldn't like reveal it. There was specifically one instance where like they kept putting out press releases saying, this like building in East Halls needs to get tested. Everybody needs to go get tested. This building does. These 3 buildings do. And eventually it was just like, they're like, all of East Halls needs to get tested. And we kept saying, is there a cluster? Like, have cases risen there exponentially? And they got frustrated at us for publishing an editorial because they wouldn't tell us. And the response that we got was, well, cases are actually just rising everywhere. And it's like, well, then why, are you only telling people in East Halls to get tested right now? But then also there was the 2020 election to cover. So lots of, big news topics. And then, half the time we thought sports weren't going to happen, and then sports slowly started happening, and then all sports started happening at once in the spring. So we had a very busy semester amid the pandemic.
Dave, was there anything for you that really jumps out to you in your memory?
For me?
Yeah, in terms of...
Well, most of the issues that we were dealing with were campus issues like student housing, student parking, or with enough parking spaces, drinking in the fraternities, whether they had to have house mothers and so forth. One of the hot issues was whether women could wear Bermuda shorts on the campus, which was a very serious issue. But that period was actually shadowed by war, because there were still veterans from World War II on campus under the GI Bill, and the Korean War broke out 2 weeks after I graduated from high school. I ran from 1950 to 1953, and some of your classmates at Penn, our classmates, including collegiate people, were being drafted. leaving the newsroom. And it was a very nerve-wracking time. And of course, communists were lurking everywhere. Joe McCarthy was raising all kinds of fuss. The biggest national issue we dealt with was that there was a demand in the state legislature for a loyalty oath from the faculty, demanding that they pledge loyalty to the United States. Opposed that, as did Collegian. A compromise was reached. The loyalty oath was never passed, and that was perhaps the hottest national issue that we dealt with.
Definitely. And before we get into some of the audience questions for the last 20 minutes, I just want to ask everybody, what would you consider your greatest takeaways from your time at the Daily Collegian? Dave, do you want us to get us started again?
Well, the Collegian was seminal to my growth and development as both a person and as a journalist. It gave me practical experience, which was absolutely essential to any achievement that I had professionally. And it gave me a body of work that I could show to employers and a record of dedication to the craft, all of which I think are essential. I can't overestimate the importance of the Collegian to the curriculum and support of the university, the academic program, because without a good, strong journalism program, a good, strong publication like the Collegian, whether it's digital or print and or both, you can't have a vigorous academic program for journalism.
Jerry, was there anything for you?
Well, I agree with everything Dave just said, first of all. It both journalistically and personally, it is the single most formative event of my life. I was thinking about something the other day. We ran a story once about people complaining about foreign graduate students and the graduate teachers who were teachers teaching, and about the difficulty understanding them in many cases and things like that. And we wrote a story about it. I must say, in retrospect, it was not the best story in the world. It could have used more balance than it had. But as editor of the paper, I got a call. There's some people who'd like to come and talk to me about it. And the next thing I knew, I was in a room with about 25 people representing a veritable United Nations, entirely, extremely angry, with a reporter also who was upset by this and was at the verge of tears. And I had to talk with them. And in the course of an hour, we talked, we calmed down, we discussed what needed to be done. And I don't know how I ever would have had that kind of experience in any other way when I was in college. And it has served me every single day of my life. And and this doesn't even get to the question of the lifelong friends friendships that I developed, people who I would walk through hell with for. It just was the best thing I ever did.
Mike, what about you?
Totally agree with everything you guys are saying. I mean, the most important professional, personal experience I ever had in my life. We took it very seriously, but it made me personally a better student. It gave me a calling and a sense of purpose and a career. I met my wife, I met friends from there. I learned how to be a colleague, how to be a reporter, how to be an editor. I made mistakes and learned how to mop up from them, which that never ends in your career. We all make mistakes and we have to learn to overcome that. And the idea that you can do that independently and make your own mistakes and then go out the next day or whenever on campus and see and hear people talking about what you did and it changed the way they live their lives. There are very few things in the world that can have that kind of impact. So I'll never forget my time at the Collegian and I'll never regret it.
Elena?
A loaded question. I could go a bunch of different routes, but no, I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy, but I literally do not think I would know who I was without the Collegian. I started at my high school newspaper and I knew I liked it, but you just have no idea what you're going to learn whenever you get there. And that's learning what you love, it's learning what you don't love. I've made so many friends there, people who I love very dearly. I think that there are so many places where you can really learn and grow and thrive if you want to be a journalism student at Penn State, but I just think the Collegian does it like no one else. And I mean, something that I haven't really gotten to touch on much is like, I also feel super fortunate about the time that I was there, because when I entered as a freshman, we were still printing 5 days a week. And by the time I was done as a senior, I mean, we technically weren't really printing at all because of COVID, but we were printing twice a week, and we were just way more focused on digital. And you cannot get that digital and kind of online physical experience that you get at the Collegian at any of the other outlets. It's just really cool to kind of conquer 2 different beasts and learn from that, and work with a business division too. I mean, that's so underrated, just in terms of, learning how to be a better leader, a better communicator. Yeah, there's just such a wealth of experience. I wouldn't be where I am or doing what I'm doing now without it, no question.
Maddie?
Yeah, I mean, I think to echo what everybody said, I think, the Collegian definitely, it introduced me to journalism actually, because my high school didn't have a paper. And I changed my major to journalism because I enjoyed it so much at the Collegian. But I think specifically it really became, the place at Penn State where I formed, really deep friendships. I was always really excited to go into the office. It feels like when I think about my time at Penn State, I think about the classes, after I think about the Collegian, just because, in classes, you maybe like write a few articles and, you get lectures where you're told how to do things, but at the Collegian, you really don't get like the newsroom culture. You don't have to make any big decisions in classes. You don't actually face usually ethical dilemmas in classes, and you don't get any sort of management or leadership experience. So I'm very grateful for my time at the Collegian because of that, but also because I think there's a really good culture there right now, and I think it felt good to have friends there, but also as an upperclassman, make people feel welcome and make people feel like they had a place at Penn State.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with all of that. And I'll say one thing for me is that pretty much everybody will stay until like midnight or like 1 o'clock in the morning, but it never feels like work. You're just kind of there and like hanging out with your friends. And you could we've had people stay till 5 o'clock in the morning, but that's a different story. Jordan, I know that there was a PowerPoint. Did we want to get into that before the questions, or?
Yeah, if you want, I can quickly just do a quick, let's see, little buzz through here of some. So we pulled for all of our attendees, we pulled together some images here of it's a mixed bag, so of time. So I'm just going to quickly go through, and if any panelists certainly want to comment, not that we have anyone here from 1887, but this sort of covers the early days of the Collegian. There's some cool headlines in here, and some great imagery as well. And so I'll just click through if anyone wants me to stop at a certain point because a specific headline that we've already covered or that we haven't covered jumps out. Feel free to do so, but sort of gives you a feel for how the Collegian has been that chronicle of what's happened both in Penn State life and also the world. I know there's at least one here that we'll get a quick anecdote out of Dave on for sure. I don't think it's Bermuda shorts, although that, Dave, now that you're back, there is a question as to when Bermuda shorts were approved.
I don't know. I can't remember. I don't think it was while I was there.
Interesting to know too, when we were sort of prepping for today, not only obviously the name and the header itself, but even the slogan or tagline here for the Daily Collegian, for a better Penn State. This is here in 1954, but that will change as you see as we get closer. And of course the ads, print ads for sure.
Camels. There she is. That's my wife on the right.
We planted this. We got a couple personal photos in here. Dave, you want this one?
Yep, that's ours. That was a big day.
Sorry, a couple of these are a little bit low res.
Hey, we used to print that.
Looks like a stock ticker.
We only had 11,000 students, so.
PG rated session. I'm going to keep going. Obviously, the logo has changed now. It's the weekly Collegian ad.
That was us.
Yep. This is my era. Just one or two more.
Yeah,
Here.
I'll point out again that that's my byline on that story.
Yeah, good point. This one, yep. Which you did not realize, right, at the time?
I didn't realize what, that the Collegian ran it?
Yeah, right, or like
it was kind of at the back of my
yeah,
bottom of my list at the moment, but
sure, you had more pressing
other
priorities.
things going on. Yeah,
we all did.
Jerry, I think you and Charles Bierbauer were like the most famous journalists who visited us when I was at the Collegian.
That's a really sad commentary, but thanks, Mike. Most important page.
There you go, and that's the end of what we've got image wise. Jada, you may have caught it already, but looks like there were a couple of questions in the chat that I caught that might be interesting. One was about diversity, from everyone's era, diversity of the staff, and also a question about what people sort of went on to do after TDC. So like, did those who were reporters and editors go on to journalism careers, or have we seen that sort of change?
I can throw in something about diversity. It was always a struggle. It was a huge struggle, and something when I was editor and the people who were editors on either side of my time, we tried very hard to get people to join other than white kids. Part of that was part of it was just Penn State. I mean, it was not the most diverse place in the 1970s to begin with. But there was also a carryover from an incident that happened, I think, in 1971, in which a Collegian reporter, a white Collegian reporter, who was thrown out of a meeting of a Black activist group, eavesdropped, wrote the story, and caused all hell broke loose. Hundreds of copies of the Collegian disappeared the next day, and I think were burned somewhere. There was a huge thing where the board of directors of Collegian Incorporated fired the editor and the reporter for the last couple weeks of the term, and it caused in Pennsylvania journalism. It was a cause célèbre, and Pennsylvania Newspaper Publishers Association investigated it and everything else. Put all that aside, it made it even harder to get Blacks to join the staff. And we tried, and we were terribly unsuccessful with it.
We had no racial diversity at the Collegian when I was there, and I don't know that there was ever a serious thought about doing it. But one of the most remarkable things was in 1954, Jesse Arnell, who was an athlete, who was Black, was elected student body president of the university, which for 1954 was a pretty remarkable event because it was just the beginnings of the civil rights movement.
I was just going to say, diversity is definitely still a struggle. The staff is still predominantly white. And that's definitely something that, you know, we were thinking about during my tenure, and I'm sure during Elena's tenure too. I do think that we don't have any solid numbers, but at least I know the Collegian is much more diverse as I left it than when I joined. So I assume that it's the most diverse that it has been. But I know one thing that we were focusing on during my tenure was, you know, not only recruitment, you know, we tried to recruit, you know, as many people as possible from, you know, different majors, different backgrounds, reaching out to different organizations and clubs just to try to get the name out, but also focusing on our actual content, you know, making sure that we were being sensitive with all of our reporting so that people wouldn't feel like the Collegian was just a student newspaper for certain students, but for all students. So that's definitely one of our focuses, but it definitely still is, you know, an issue that the Collegian faces, as I'm sure most, you know, college newspapers and actual newspapers are facing right now as well.
Yeah, I think going off of what Maddie said too, such a huge part of it is having a staff that actually cares about having racial diversity. Like, I mean, if people don't care about it, it's not something that people are going to be actively looking out for when they're editing stories, when they're writing stories, when they're coming up with story ideas, you know, when they're putting a staff together. So that's something that I think has gotten really important, especially over the past couple of years, because it's like, if you don't care, you don't really belong on staff. But I mean, diversifying our staff is something that the Collegian is always going to have to work on. I mean, we are the student newspaper and student-run media outlet at a predominantly white institution. That this paper and this outlet has a history of being run pretty much by white people. So I mean, it's just always going to be something that, like, we're going to have to continue to reach out to organizations to listen really hard to what people have to say, to figure out how to be better and to not be sensitive about it, because we're not serving the community if we're not actually, you know, hearing all of the voices that need to be heard, inviting them to be part of our staff, making them feel like they can feel comfortable on our staff. Because I mean, there are definitely things that have happened racially insensitive with the Collegian, and sometimes, you know, it's accidents that people make, or, you know, maybe it's editorials that have aged over time that, you know, are racist in essence now, and, you know, we can see that and recognize it. But yeah, I mean, there's been hurt that's definitely been caused over the years, and it's just something that you're always going to have to work on, you know, listening and making sure that people can trust you with covering their stories. Like, that's the whole point of being a journalist, is that, you know, you want sources to be able to trust you and know that, you know, you are smart enough that you pay enough attention to actually cover what they're saying. So.
Yeah, and something to Jake's point that he just put in the chat, Jake Ferriet, who just graduated. I know that part of the question was about diversity in terms of women and men on staff as well. And I will say, you know, recently there's definitely a lot more women on staff than there are men, which is probably not true to how the Collegian used to be, especially a lot of women in leadership roles. And one of the other questions that Jordan said earlier was that we got in the chat was about how many people on staff actually entered into the journalism industry after leaving the Collegian. So if anybody wants to answer.
I could take that one. I think quite a few people from our era in the 90s really did go into journalism. And of course, a lot of the paths that many of us took have crumbled rapidly behind us. There's still quite a few people who are sticking it out or hanging on for dear life. But I think a lot of people went into other lines of work, whether it was marketing or public relations, some healthcare. I think the one thing everybody has in common, though, is the ability to communicate clearly, the ability to write, the ability to edit other people's writing. I mean, that you need that in every field. And it's just amazing to me how difficult it is for a lot of people to communicate. And so that's another thing the Collegian can do for you.
I don't know if it's useful for me to say this right now. I don't know if it's my turn, but I did take a gap year post-COVID times. So I graduated in May of 2020. And I just finished up my gap year about a month ago. So I just started my first job recently, and I'm working in public relations and digital marketing. And honestly, I don't think that's what I thought I would have been doing a year ago. But I just think that something that I really valued when I was editor-in-chief, honestly, was working on social media and analytics and, putting together operating reports for the board of directors and, moments like that where communications is really so vast. And I think that's something that journalism students are getting way more of a taste of now, especially because we're kind of veering off from print. It's like, what are all of the options to communicating with people? Is it through an Instagram story? Is it on Facebook? Is it on Twitter? Is it through a TikTok? And I think that's really busting the door open for people to get more involved in social media and maybe, pursue careers in that, or for people to get involved in, more of the marketing side because they're seeing all these other modes of communication that they have access to. So I think that's definitely something for me that I knew I wanted to get to New York City, and I wanted to have a salary that I could live on. So that's part of the reason I went PR as well. But I just think that communications is expanding even further and further now, and the options for what you can do with it are so far beyond, even if you major in journalism, to go other paths as well. So I'm not leaving journalism behind forever, I don't think, but I think we're taking a pivot at the moment. So.
Of the seniors who just graduated, I think the majority of those who have jobs did get them in journalism, but I feel like we also are seeing more people go into PR or, social media based jobs. I haven't announced anything, but I plan on going into journalism, and the managing editor under me is also in journalism right now. But the other member of the top three, the digital managing editor, is in social media right now. And I will also say that at least for me, and the vibe that I'm getting now is that when people are younger, they're very much like, I'm never going to go into PR or any sort of communications field. I need to be in journalism. And by the end of my time as editor-in-chief, I was much more open to PR, and I still am now. I want to try out journalism because I still love it. But it's definitely something that I could see myself doing now, whereas, 4 years ago, I would have been like, I don't want to do that. And I think at least the vibe I get is that a lot of the people on staff are the same. And, some people try out the Collegian and they just decide that journalism isn't for them at all anymore. So, yeah.
And if anyone's looking for a job, I think one just got posted in the chat. So, not only do we share memories, we also plant people at their first jobs. Look at that. I do think, and I'll wrap it because I know we're coming to the top of the hour, but the skills and the experiences, obviously, that everyone on our panels talked about, I think open doors today because of just the fractured, work environment that we have. There are opportunities. All the things that you learn and gain in your years of the Collegian, you can take in a plethora of different directions these days, from, in-house at a brand to whatever a publisher today means, because kind of everyone's a publisher, whether you're an individual, a company, a true publisher, entertainment company, et cetera. So it's, it's scary, but at the same time, there's all this great opportunity. I'm getting the 1 minute warning from Shar. So I'll thank all of our panelists again. Jay did a great job. Thanks, Dave, Jerry, Maddie, Elena, Mike. Really appreciate you coming together for this. Thanks for everyone who attended. I know there's going to be an on-demand version of this that will get posted and disseminated. So we really appreciate it. Thanks for pulling it together. Thanks for all the questions, and support the Collegian. They need it, and we appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks
Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.